So hi, everyone, and welcome to our May Hope session. I'm Heidi Parker. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Community Initiatives Manager here at the Arts and Healing Initiative, and I am your Zoom host today. This program is presented as part of our free Hope series, Healing Online for People Everywhere, which we created to support the resilience of our global community through social emotional arts. Each workshop offers a supportive space for connection, healing, and empowerment as we navigate the changes in our world. If you have previously attended a Hope session, welcome back. And if you are new, thank you for joining us today. We are grateful you are all here to create, learn, and grow together as a community. Today's program is in a meeting format, so please keep yourself muted until prompted otherwise. We are recording today's session in speaker view to be shared on our YouTube channel, and you are welcome to leave your cameras on as you feel comfortable, as we'd love for you to actively participate. If we do have reflections, I do edit those out, so feel comfortable to share as much as you would like today. Our session today is scheduled for an hour, and feel free to add questions in the chat as they arise, or you can use the raise hand function. So before we begin, we would like to start by acknowledging the Tongva Nation, on whose land the city of Los Angeles, where we are based, rests today. We hold respect and gratitude for the Tongva people who still consider themselves the caretakers of this land. By their example, we are reminded of our responsibility to our planet and to one another. So let's take a moment in our own way to honor the Indigenous communities of past and present on whose land you are joining from today, and feel free to honor the communities where you are joining from in the chat. I would like to welcome today's presenter. Erica Curtis is a board-certified art therapist and licensed marriage and family therapist, and is an internationally sought-after speaker on creative approaches to emotional and relationship health. Formerly an instructor in the Loyola Marymount University Department of Marriage and Family Therapy with specialized training in art therapy, she now serves as their admissions consultant and maintains a therapy practice in San Juan Capistrano. Erica is an award-winning author with Ping Ho of The Innovative Parent, Raising Connecting Happy, Successful Kids Through Art. And she is also the author of Art Therapy Activities for Kids and Working with Anger Creatively, 70 art therapy inspired activities to safely soothe, harness, and redirect anger for meaningful change. And you'll receive more information about Erica at the end of this session and in your follow-up email. So thank you, Erica, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Heidi. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for your interest in social emotional arts. I really love doing these workshops and other trainings with the Arts and Healing Initiative, working with other professionals who are out there doing meaningful work through creativity, educators, therapists, parents, mentors, community leaders, and even your personal work. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I am being asked to confirm my speaking language. Interestingly, Zoom thinks I'm speaking in Spanish. I'm going to cancel that. I've never had that happen before. That must be some new AI fancy something or other. We're going to go right into an activity, actually, and then I'm going to speak a little bit more about the arts, how it's particularly helpful in working with anger. When I use the word anger, I'm using that very broadly. Feel free to substitute any word that works for you when you're working with folks, using the words that they use, whether that is irritation, frustration, disappointment, not angry at all ever, right? And so we'll be looking at different ways to address anger, but using those words that fit for you. So before I go into more explanation, if you have a piece of paper available, feel free to grab that now. It can be a Post-it note, it can be printer paper, any type of paper, lined paper, a notebook, anything works, back of a paper bag, and some markers or colored pencils, pens, regular pencil, whatever you have available. And we're going to start by actually imagining holding anger in your hand. Now, if you're not feeling particularly angry or irritated or frustrated this morning, feel free to think of something low key, right? Don't pick a 10 out of 10, right? Something that's irritating you, something that's frustrating you, something maybe that you even feel stuck, right? Sometimes people experience anger, flavors of anger as a stuck feeling, or like an energy with a stuckness around that energy, right? So whatever makes sense for you, feel free to think of something in particular. I'm just going to remind folks also to make sure that your mics are turned off right now, as I am getting a little bit of feedback from somebody's mic. So just check that your mics are turned off, or perhaps Heidi, you can turn off everybody's mics. Thank you so much. So going back, taking a moment to just connect with a slight feeling of stuckness, irritation, agitation, and just so you can really experience and get a felt sense of what that experience is like. And then imagine holding that in your hand. And just imagine holding that in your hand. Now you may want to squeeze it tightly or just gently close your hand around it. And with your eyes open or closed, it's up to you, whatever you're comfortable with. Go ahead and imagine that feeling or that experience in your hand as a shape, a color, a texture, an object. And I encourage you to try to be curious, see what naturally arises, knowing that sometimes if we're trying too hard or we're feeling like I don't know what it is, to see if you can allow yourself to not know, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's surprising, just seeing what other color, shape, texture, form arises. And now I'm going to invite you to keep hold of that color or object, place it on your paper. You might want to open your eyes now, and you're going to take a pencil or pen and you're going to trace around your closed hand. Okay, so we're going to do a hand tracing with that closed hand. So it's going to look a bit like a fist. See if you can see mine. It's a bit blurred because of my background blurring. Right? You can see the shape of that. Okay. So take a moment now to trace that closed hand. And once you've done that, I invite you to use colors, or if you don't have colors, your regular pen or pencil, to somehow illustrate what you imagined was within your hand. So go ahead and add lines, shapes, colors, symbol to illustrate whatever you imagined was closed inside your hand. Now continue to feel free to draw and add. At this time, I'm going to speak a little bit. Depending on the context that you're working in, if you're working in a classroom, if you're working one-on-one in therapy, if you're working with a group, if you're working with a dyad, right? How much time you have, I only have 5 minutes or I have an hour, right? These are places where you can create choices for how long you spend on certain aspects of the activity, right? So you may even in advance say, just quickly put down line, shape, color. We're going to spend 1 minute on it, or you can give people 15 minutes, right? To really add detail and get curious about it, and really put more energy and work and time into it. Now, the shorter amount of time or the longer amount of time, depending on the individuals, that might help them to feel more contained, right? Like just put down a shape and some color, right? Might be really helpful for people who don't feel inclined towards the arts, right? Or expressing themselves creatively. For others, though, it might make them feel anxious, right? So just be aware of all the variety of people's experiences, individual experiences, and just know that we can be conscious and thoughtful of those varying experiences with the way that we facilitate or give a direction. And just allowing people to know that that's okay, whatever experience arises, because through the process of art, we can become aware of even the experiences that we have while creating our images. And we can use that also to bring more insight and understanding into ourselves and into areas of our lives where we might get stuck, overwhelmed, anxious, angry, and so forth. Right? So I'm now going to invite you to come back to that closed hand or that closed fist. Right? And now what we're going to do together whenever you're ready is we're going to release it. We're going to open it up. And as you do that, just imagine you can play around with that feeling, right? Holding anger and releasing anger. Holding anger and releasing anger. And feel free to take your own time with this. And what I'm going to encourage you to do next is to imagine that shape, color, texture, form, symbol in your hand, and just see what happens when you open your hand. So just watching those colors, shapes, object. And you may want to stay there a little bit with your hand open to see what happens next with that image. And perhaps they change, perhaps it stays the same, perhaps there's movement, perhaps something replaces it. And feel free again to take your time whenever you're ready. I'm going to invite you to now trace your open palm on the paper. You may overlap. You may put it next to the closed hand. You may put it on the opposite side of the paper, wherever feels right to you. Placing your open hand on the paper. You may use the same color or a different color. Maybe if I hold it next to me, there we go. You can get a sense of that. Okay, open hand. There it is. Yay, I found it. Found the sweet spot. All right. And similar to before, feel free to add lines, shapes, colors, object symbols to illustrate how the shapes or colors changed, if they changed or if they stayed the same. Showing what is there now. Taking a moment to do that.
Could you repeat that last instruction? I'm sorry, I was distracted with my hand.
Of course. So placing the open hand now on the piece of paper, tracing the hand open, and then adding lines, colors, shapes, symbols, or words, right, to the drawing, to the illustration that now shows what has emerged, what has changed, what has stayed the same, what has shifted. You'll notice I'm leaving these instructions fairly open. There's 54 of you on here, right? There's a lot of different needs. I don't know you, right? This is going to be on Zoom or on YouTube after this recorded, right? Have no idea who out there is going to be doing this activity. So I am leaving the instructions very broad, right? Some folks benefit from more containment or more specific instructions. And so that might sound, for example, and if any of you are struggling like, oh, line, shapes, colors, symbols, objects, what, right? Pick a color, right? Just a color. Right? And you can just work with the color. How has the color changed? Has it not changed? Right? And if you'd like to, you can add a line or a shape. Think about that. Right? So we can provide a little bit more containment with those instructions. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, about energy, right? That there's an energy that comes with anger, or again, using the word anger broadly, right? Frustration, irritation, stuckness around anger, right? There is an energy. That's a common experience, right? And how we direct that anger or that energy, how we harness that energy, what we do with that energy, right? So even speaking, right, using voice, that's mobilizing that energy, right? I want to speak also briefly, Jacqueline shared that she's a visual artist. Imagery comes easily. Not everybody connects with imagery easily or quickly, and that's okay. With those folks, I will either, like I said, simplify the instructions, just pick a color. Well, I don't know what color to pick. Doesn't matter, just choose one, right? I still don't know. Okay, how about from these 3 colors, which one feels the most right without having to know why? Just pick one. So you can see how we can narrow down the choices to make it easier, right? I will also work with words, right? Some people, if they have a hard time with imagery, I will say, what word floats to mind, right? Now, does that word have a font, right? Does that word have a color, right? And then that kind of brings in a little bit more of the imagery. It is so profound, right? What we can experience. And I will say not everybody may have a profound experience every time, and that's okay too, right? Depends on where we're at. We want to be gentle with our process. People who have been more stuck for longer, may just find a little bit of incremental insight, for example, or we might experience what might feel like a more profound shift internally through these exercises. Art therapy approaches arts activities with a lot of intention through the media that we choose, the directives that we give, how much expression and containment, even the size of the paper has intention. To move towards certain goals, right? I also want to add, though, as you are facilitating social and emotional arts, because those of you who are not certified art therapists, right? If you use these in your own practice or with others, I welcome you to call it like a social emotional arts activities, that even people who are not art therapists can benefit from using these types of activities with others, right? And benefit others. But what I want to say is that sometimes the intended outcome is not what happens. And that doesn't mean that the activity didn't work. It doesn't mean that it was the wrong activity. So for those of you who are facilitators, right, also bringing a kindness and awareness that whatever arises is welcome. And can be sort of known in the room, and move people forward towards their goals, even if it looks different than what's expected initially. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We're going to chat a little bit. So I'll share with you one of the reasons why I wrote this book. Is because I'm rather anger adverse. Anger and I have not historically had, a very regular relationship, and so I was very curious about anger and my own relationship with anger and other people's relationship with anger. And I was also struck by, the number of signs in businesses in the last several years that said, please be kind. We're doing our best. Those who become belligerent or angry or aggressive will be escorted out. I mean, for the first time ever, seeing signs in just, doctors' offices, places of business, asking people, please be nice to our workers. And so that was something else that struck me and sort of sparked my curiosity again, just about anger and this emotion, and what is it, and what are we doing with it, and what's going on, right, with folks and anger right now. So that drove my interest, curiosity, to start researching more about it, really looking back at anecdotally my own work with folks over the years. I've been a practicing mental health provider for over 20 years. And looking at, how anger comes up in different ways at different times and how we can work with it, and hoping that some of that information and my own experiences as a professional can benefit others. So I did do some research and found that even before 2020 and since 2020, more people are feeling angrier, more intensely, more often than ever. That's what the polls are showing right now. And it's pretty striking and probably not surprising to a lot of you. Okay. But how that anger is felt and perceived, it differs. And I do believe that there has historically been some limitations in the area of anger and working with anger. And so I hope bringing this creative aspect to it really starts to expand our compassion towards anger, of the various ways that anger can show up. We understand it's universally felt and experienced, and there are some universal qualities to anger, but there's also a lot of variation in how anger is triggered, how it builds, how it peaks, how it resolves. how it's expressed, how it's received. And when we use the creative arts, we can really start to get, as was mentioned before in some of our discussion, that we can really get to the meaning and the felt experience of anger very quickly through personal imagery. And I say personal imagery, right, because I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the common metaphors out there. That anger is a volcano, anger is a monster, anger is a bomb waiting to go off. And I think because our society has been so saturated with these metaphors, it's taken away the opportunity for people to really get to know their own anger on a personal level, right? And so we can start to use imagery to explore and get curious about how do I experience anger, and what is the personal meaning for me, and how might be helpful, right? And that's an important piece as well. So those of you who have heard me speak before, you're familiar with this acronym, but it's always nice to hear it again. And those who haven't, I hope you enjoy and appreciate this acronym. I'm going to toot my own horn. I was really excited when I realized that the word arts actually encapsulates what I would say are some of the core principles of how art can be therapeutic, or how art is therapeutic. So for me, A stood for access. So A allows us to access something from within us. I was just speaking about that, right? What is inside of me? What is my own personal experience of this memory, this thought, this interaction, this emotion? It gives us access to our internal world. And that's especially important when we are angry or in a heightened state of stress, frustration, agitation, or stuckness, right? Collapse around that anger. Because when we are in those activated or highly deactivated states, we don't have a lot of access to our thinking, problem solving, and language centers of the brain. So through sensory experiences that are provided to us by the arts, we can still access what's going on inside of us and express that outwardly. Okay, so access. So ARTS. So A standing for access. We can access something from within ourselves, our internal world, even when we're under stress, which is when our thinking, problem solving, and language parts of the brain are negatively impacted. They're weakened, right? Because we're really in a state of survival. We're moving more into a state of either arousal or shutdown to just address the situation at hand, right? Not wanting to think through. I mean, if you think about going back, if a saber-tooth tiger was approaching us, we wouldn't want to stop and consider whether or not he was really hungry or not. We wouldn't have a conversation. Like, what do you think we should do? Like, no, we would activate and we would mobilize, right? Or if in a worst case scenario, we would shut down. So under these heightened states of arousal, of emotion, we can still access our internal world, our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, our experiences through the arts. Once we've done that, now we have something to reflect on. We call this externalizing. We create an art object. In my case, that's through the visual arts. If you've ever taken any of the other trainings with Arts and Healing Initiative, sometimes that's through creating music, poetry, movement, right? But now we have something that's external, outside of us, and we can step back and we can get a little distance from it. We can observe it now. So just by that process of stepping back and reflecting, I often observe a little shift, right? A little bit of relief, just in the fact that now there is something that I'm experiencing that's not here or here, but out here. Right? And people can begin to feel the separation and distance between themselves and their feeling or their emotion, right? We start to reflect, we can put words to it, and that starts to bring thinking brain back online. Now, T stands for transform. Now that we have an art object to work with, we can transform it, and you all just had that experience. Not only did we work with the body and experiencing these sensory experiences of clenching and releasing, but we paired that visualization and that drawing with it, so we can start to explore transformation, right? How do we start with an image, a color, a shape, and then transform it? And by transforming on the paper or in the imagination, that color, shape, object, symbol, we start to actually transform our feelings about it. And so it's sort of this reverse cycle then, right? First, we take from what's inside and put it outside, reflect on it, transform what's outside of it, and then it starts to change and transform what's inside of us again. So we have this really nice relationship back and forth. And we can do that socially. We know so much now about the importance of safe connection with others and how regulating that is to our nervous systems, how it gives us access to our problem-solving brain, our compassion for ourselves and for others when we're in connection with others. Right? It's like safety and connection biologically are wired inside of us. If we don't feel like our connections are intact, we don't feel safe, right? And we are more inclined to then activate anger, feel agitated, irritated, or collapse around those feelings. So we can do that socially in several ways. One, those of you who are joining us today, right? You're in community together. You're in community with me. You're also in community with yourself and your paper, right? The art. We can do that by making art in the shared environment, talking about art or not talking about it. We are together and we're experiencing this, okay? So I believe that there are some very specific ways that art can help anger in particular. One of the inherent qualities of art is it is both expressive and containing. A lot of people have a hard time, not everybody, but just anecdotally, a lot of people have a hard time with anger or working with folks who have anger, experience strong anger, because it does have a tendency to be eruptive. It can get aggressive. It can get scary, right? And one of the qualities of the arts is it is expressive, allowing people to move energy or to get out, right? Direct that energy of anger, but it's also containing the corners of the paper, right? The sides of the paper, the materials that we use, the directives that we give. I spoke to that a little bit earlier, can provide more or less containment. So it is both energetic, and also safe, right? Creates that natural containment to be able to start exploring anger in a healthy and safe way. It's also very versatile, right? I've been speaking a lot about, highly active anger or collapsed anger, right? Where something is stuck around that anger, not allowing us to access it. And so art can be very versatile for working with both folks who are anger adverse, right, or quick to anger. And I'll even say people's nervous systems. It's not that we necessarily choose these different ways of being. So nervous systems that tend to be more adverse to anger or quick to anger. Personal imagery I already spoke to. The importance of anger coming with very personal meaning, personal imagery, and overcoming these common metaphors, unless those common metaphors relate personally to you and are helpful to you. Right? I talked a lot about separating, right? The value in working with anger, being able to observe without reacting to it. I think there's a lot of natural qualities of the arts of separating ourselves from an emotion, but still being in relation with that emotion and being able to develop that objective, non-judgmental awareness of that emotion. And we also see a lot of research coming out of the therapeutic arts that speak to how just art making, even if it's not about anger or about anything in particular, just art making in and of itself guides the nervous system back into states of well-being. Right? So there are many different ways to engage with anger. So this image on the left here actually comes from one of the activities in the book that we're not going to do today. But I'd like to show this illustration here to really speak to some of the limitations I believe that have been out there in working with anger. You can just do a quick search online on working with anger or anger management. Controlling anger, how to control your anger, how to stomp your anger out, how to manage your anger. I'm not saying that there's not benefits to these approaches, but just opening up the discussion and opening up the thinking about all the different ways that we can work with anger. And even thinking about how do we want to relate to our anger is a really valuable process. And this is an art activity that instructs or invites people to consider their relationship with anger and then reconsider what they want that relationship to look like. So some of the chapters in the book are self-care. That's one way to relate to anger, getting to know anger, recruiting other emotions to help us with understanding and supporting and harnessing anger, awakening anger. That's a little unusual, I think. And we're usually trying to calm it down, right? But for a lot of folks, awakening it, right? And we had a share earlier about the importance of being able to come into safe contact with anger. So how can we safely awaken it, soothing it, harnessing it, navigating it? Okay. So we did one activity already. I'm just going to do a little recap of that activity we did earlier that came from the theme of soothing anger. This is what you did earlier. Here's a little illustration that I did. Right now, you could repeat this exercise several times over. Right? And you can play around with variations again of this exercise. So you could squeeze, release, and then trace. You can squeeze, release, trace, trace, do it again, squeeze and release, and see how the images continue to change over time. We just did it the one time for the sake of time and for the sake of containment, but just allowing you to see the many ways that you can use your own creativity and your own ideas to take these as just foundational ideas. I was inspired actually by a very common strategy in working with anger in general, which is progressive relaxation, right? Squeezing muscles and then releasing muscles, right, in the body. And so I took that very common, long-standing technique of progressive relaxation and put a creative spin to it, right? Added that imagery piece. So we can get inspired all over the place and think, okay, how can I change this? How can I add to this? How can I direct this in more particular ways? All right. So we're going to do another activity now. We're going to actually do one on awakening anger. So when we're awakening anger, right, we want to be cautious. For a couple of reasons. Excuse me. Not only because we don't want anger to come outward and harm others, but we also don't want to be overwhelmed by our own anger. We don't want to overwhelm our own nervous system. So I'm going to invite you to take a piece of paper. You can use the back of the piece of paper that you already used, or you can select a new piece of paper and you can divide it in half. You can fold it, or you can draw a line down the middle. And once you've done that, I'm going to invite you to write "you may not" on one side and "you may" on the other side. And now I'm going to invite you to brainstorm what you would not tolerate from anger, what anger is not allowed to do, what anger is not allowed to get you to do. So for example, anger, you may not keep me awake at night. You may not make me lose my cool. You may not ruin my day. So these are just some examples. There's no right or wrong. Right? If it sounds strange and silly, you can go with that. You may not make me eat pancakes. I don't know. Whatever comes, right? Sometimes people will say, oh, yeah, I thought of something, but it wasn't relevant. I'll say, let's just see, what was it? And then once they tell me, and we talk a little bit more about it, it's like, oh my gosh, this has to do with this memory of this time, and I was really angry about it. And it can seem totally arbitrary. Right? But the brain has a way of making associations and bringing forth the information that it wants us to have in the moment. So I'll give you a moment now to brainstorm what anger may not do. Your anger, your irritation, your frustration, your stuckness, right? Remembering to replace whatever word feels most accurate to you. And whenever you're ready, on the other side, you will brainstorm what you are willing to accept from anger. what you are willing to accept. For example, anger, you may help me be more direct. Anger, you may alert me to injustices. Anger, you may advocate for me. Now, the list can be short, it can be long. If you're struggling, maybe just think of one thing on each side. Doesn't have to be lengthy. And if it's difficult for an individual to think about themselves, we can think of others, right? In general, what are things that feel intolerable about anger, right? What would you not want anger to do to anybody, right? In general, thinking of others, what might you feel comfortable or allow? What might be okay for anger to help people with? Right, so that's another element of separation, right? Of a little bit of distancing from anger again when we talk about others instead of talking about ourselves. And then once you finish that, use your brainstorms to inspire an illustration of anger with two halves, capturing both the downsides and the upsides of anger. And you can use that center divide if you'd like to as the separating line for your illustration. Okay, now to keep it very simple, you can make a shape, right? That has sort of two different halves to it. You can use colors, right? Two different colors. And what do they look like where they meet? How do they interact? Or you can draw a character or some other symbol with two halves inspired by your brainstorm. And as you're doing that, as you're working on the illustration, I'll just share a little bit more about how this activity can help to awaken anger. So if we have a tendency towards aversion to anger, we don't want to come into contact, right? It can be very helpful to think first about what we don't like about anger, to accept that. That's why I call this activity anti-anger affirmation. We can affirm that. We can say that's okay. It's okay to want to be anti-anger, right? It's allowing that experience to be there, right? And then when we can allow that there are things we don't want, we can start to think of the flip side. We can start to think of what we do want, right? So I like to think of the analogy of running at the pool, right? Like, don't run. We don't want to run at the pool, right? Well, what do we want people to do? We want them to walk. And sometimes it can be really hard to think about what we do want people to do or what we do want an emotion to do until we first acknowledge what we don't want, right? So we can start to come into contact with anger by acknowledging first that boundary. We're kind of setting a boundary with anger, saying, hey, you're not allowed to cross this line, right? And then from that place, it can also start to feel safer to acknowledge what we do want or what we prefer if we were to come into contact with our own feelings of anger. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share so I can see your faces. And feel free to continue adding to your illustration. You can add words if you want to. You can put a title on it. You can take some time to reflect on it. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask if anybody would feel inclined to share their experience, what that activity was like, any places you felt stuck, anything that felt uncomfortable, or any pleasant or positive insights or felt experiences. All experiences are welcome. All emotions are welcome. And if it's all right with you, Izzy, I don't want to put a big spotlight on you. I did notice also, so sometimes, right, talking about these different expressive modalities, sometimes we'll just naturally, the body will express part of the image as well, right? And so you may have seen the expression here, right, with the may not. And then there was an expression here, which was a you may. Right. And so if you wanted to, you don't have to on your own time. If you wanted to just notice this and then transfer it into this, right? And just see what that's like to move this imagery with the hand into this imagery, right? Or this movement. Yeah. And you may even find, and this is what I'll do with clients, is that a natural gesture or natural color or whatever will emerge, right? We can embody that, and then they can come back to that motion another time, right? So if they're starting to feel like anger is up here and it's rumination and it's not helpful, that just by using that hand gesture and transferring it into this hand gesture, right, starts to help with, and you use the word flow, right? You may not interrupt my flow. And when you use, this is the gesture you use when you said flow, right? Yeah. So you can experiment with that on your own if you'd like to. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right. I'm going to share my screen again. All right. I put 3 activities in here, not knowing if we would have the time, but we do. All right. So we're going to do one on navigating anger in relationships now. Okay. And just like was brought up by the last share, being gentle with yourself, knowing your own boundaries, your own limitations, right? If any of these activities feel like, whoa, that's too much, I'm not ready for that, like that's okay, right? These are some of the later chapters in the book. I took a little bit of a risk I did the soothing anger. I was intentional about like, we got to be able to soothe anger before we can activate it, right? Because we don't want to stir it up and be like, oh no, we don't have any way to soothe it now. Right. So there are some precursors, right, that when we're starting to work with anger, depending on where we're at. Sometimes in the first session, I'll just assess where people's coping strategies are, what they already have access to. Even something like looking around the room and naming colors. Can that bring them back? Can that bring them back into a state of groundedness, of self-regulation? And if so, then we can move more, rapidly towards harnessing anger, awakening anger, navigating anger in relationships, because there's already tools there that we can come back in case it starts to become overwhelming to the individual, right? So that's really important to keep in mind. We would not want to go straight into harnessing anger, awakening anger, navigating anger without first knowing that there's tools there to be able to soothe it and come back. Again, as much for others in the environment as for the individual. Because when folks can start to feel overwhelmed in their own nervous system, it's not helpful, right? And I will even check in, is that tolerable? Because there can be a lot of activity there. There can be a lot of emotion, and I'll say, is it tolerable? And if somebody goes, yeah, it's tolerable, great, then we can experience it, right? So that can be helpful as well. Also, another little tidbit, is it pleasant, unpleasant? Right, that's a helpful little check-in with folks and with yourself, right? I'm feeling all this energy, right? It's easy for us to assume that, oh, that's good, or, ooh, that sounds like too much, that sounds bad, that sounds scary. Is that pleasant energy or unpleasant energy, right? And even children can do this. I was working with a young child yesterday, has a hard time identifying his emotions, and I said, did your energy go up or down? It went up. Did that feel good or bad? Felt good. All right, we can keep going, right? A little bit later, did your energy just go up or down? Went up. Did that feel good or bad? Bad. Okay, let's get a little bit more containing here then. Okay. All right. So using a new piece of paper, a corner of your paper, the backside of a paper, I'm going to invite you to consider those first sensations that arise in you from an angering situation. Okay. So considering those first sensations, those early signs of something's going on. Okay, and you can draw a sunburst, a scribble, a shape in the center of your paper, or again, for more containment, use a smaller section of your paper, partition off the section, right? Talked a little bit about that before, more containment with smaller paper. Okay, then I'm going to invite you to select a new color if you have them. If not, you can just use a different line quality, different pressure with the pen or pencil that you're working with to represent an outward surge of that anger. Okay, so how that anger becomes outwardly directed. Or once that energy starts to build, right? So it could be a sunburst, a ring, another line around that first scribble or shape. Then selecting a new color if you have that, or keeping it the same if you prefer, to draw a new ring representing welcomed feelings that follow that release of anger. Now, depending on you as an individual, depending on who you're working with, that release can look behaviorally like a lot of different things. It could be anything from a healthy release of anger, like talking to somebody or going for a run, cleaning the house. Right, that can be sort of a healthy, contained outward surge, or it might be in situations that are unhealthy, hurtful, right? It might be somebody is yelling, somebody slamming something, punching something, right? So again, we can adapt this exercise depending on the individual that you're working with, or on your own experience of that surge of outward anger, right? If it does go outwards, for some of you, that outward surge might get blocked, and it might just look like a wall or a block, right? Or like nothing. Well, then it just disappears. It becomes nothing, right? So again, we can adapt this depending on the individual needs. All right. So after that release of anger, even if it's harmful, a lot of times people report some benefit. Yes, I feel, and we'll get to this in a moment, like later I feel guilty, I feel shame, I feel, right? But boy, like I slammed that cabinet and I punched it, and it was like immediately, and then the tears release, and then I collapse on the floor. Right? But there's some, or yeah, I yell at my kids and then they comply. They listen. It worked. They don't listen to me until I yell. And then suddenly they're all scurrying around to do what I said, and that feels good, right? So there's usually some gain or some benefit, right? Even if that outward expression of anger is unhealthy or harmful to self or others. Okay. So considering that, again, whether that's going for a jog or unhealthier expression of anger. And then drawing that final ring representing the short and the long-term costs, if there are any, right, of angering. So guilt, disconnection, eroding somebody else's self-worth. Now, again, we can tweak this. If the individual is expressing their anger in a really healthy way, then we can do the short and long-term benefits. Okay, so we can adjust the directions here, depending on where the individual is at. And then finally, I'll invite you to make changes to your image in order to achieve the benefits of feeling and expressing anger while minimizing the consequences. Again, it doesn't have to make sense. You might connect parts of your image. You might add something to the image. You might eliminate a part of the image. You might transform a part of the image. So just taking a final moment. I know this is a multi-step activity here. Again, if there was more time, you could spend a whole hour on this. You can spend 20 minutes on it, right? But something also helpful can come or arise just from spending a brief moment and working very spontaneously. So making any changes to achieve benefits while minimizing consequences. I'm going to stop my share, and while people are continuing to add, I'm just going to ask if anybody, I'll take one share for this activity, and then we're going to start to wrap up, and I'll take a couple questions at the end. Would anybody like to share that process? Right, and so we can see also with Charmaine's share how the different activities can support one another, right? And how there's skill building that comes with each activity. And we then do some more containing around the emotion that comes up. Insights come. It's okay if the emotion is there still, right? It might linger. You may even come back later and consider what would then be the practical translation into real life. So we're working with imagery, right? And so like with the green leaves that you added, right? Then at some point it can be helpful to say, so what would that actually look in real terms? What would that look like in my relationships, right? If these green leaves were to say something, if they were to instruct me, right? If they were to guide me somehow in either a repair or in working with my anger differently, right? And so then we could do a whole nother piece just about those green leaves and getting to know that part, because that has to do with, recruiting other emotions that I mentioned before. So now we can start to recruit those green leaves right? Whatever they mean, whatever those feelings are. But there was some assurance that came with them, right? And so now we can get to know those as well. So I'm going to end by actually reading the conclusion of my book to you. It's short. And then I'm going to share my contact information. And then Heidi has a few announcements before we end. And then I'll stay a little bit late to take some questions, but feel free if you need to go. I know it is 11 o'clock right now. In this, I talk about therapy, what I think of therapy, but feel free to substitute the word therapy if you're not a therapist, being an educator, being an artist, right? Being a human, right? So feel free as I read this to think in terms of these other roles that you have, being a parent, being a grandparent, a mentor, okay? I think of therapy like panning for gold. You scoop dirt, silt, and clouded water into your pan and you swish. You swish the water around and around, separating the elements, hoping to find a nice nugget of gold, rocks, sand, pebbles. The water does become clearer, but no gold. You scoop again and swish, rocks, sand, pebbles, but no gold. You scoop again. The process continues, but it is neither tiresome nor disappointing. It is present focused, exciting, and even hopeful. Then you see it, something shiny. Your heart jumps. You swish and you swish, perhaps a little quicker now, but still consciously and delicately so as not to spill. It becomes clear. It is not a nugget of gold, but it is a tiny gold flake. And it is beautiful. You carefully pinch it from the silt and you delicately place it into a miniature glass vial and you hold it up to the light, examining it with awe and admiration. Then you scoop dirt, silt, and clouded water into your pan again, and you swish. I hope this has given you inspiration and tools to continue scooping and swishing. I hope the activities today helped you to separate rocks, sand, and pebbles, to unmuddy some water, and to capture some golden moments of growth and healing. Thank you all for your work. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to put up my final screen so that you can stay in touch. I do have a newsletter. You can follow me on Instagram. That's my website, therapywitherica.com. I don't send out a lot of newsletter and I don't post much on Instagram. Those are my other books. As Heidi mentioned, The Innovative Parent was co-authored with Ping Ho, who, if you are not aware, is the founder and director of the Arts and Healing Initiative. And I believe Heidi also put these links in the chat, and you'll also be receiving a follow-up email with these links and information. So I'm going to stop my share, and Heidi's going to put up some more goodies and upcoming trainings and things like that for y'all.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thanks for leading us through such a creative and informative session. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, for also being patient with some of the connection challenges. And I would just like to extend our appreciation also for our donors and to the Los Angeles Department of Arts and Culture. They support this series, and so we appreciate all of that help to keep this series going. You will get a follow-up email. As Erica mentioned, the survey will be in that email. It is also in the chat. So it is just a short survey. We're just grateful to hear your experience, and also just let us know what you're interested in for the future. That just helps us continue to best serve our Hope community. And then we do have a few upcoming trainings and our Hope sessions for June and July. Those are all on our website. And we are also going to be in person. If you're in the Los Angeles area, there is a Creative Ways Mental Health Wellness Fair happening on May 25th. Lots of great mental health and wellness based vendors and experiential opportunities at that fair. It is free, and we hope that you can join us there as well. So thank you all for joining again. We hope you have a fabulous weekend. Thank you.